Why would a lonely cowboy stare at his own mail-order bride and whisper, "There must be some mistake," before inviting her home anyway? The stagecoach door slammed shut behind her with a sharp crack. Boots struck frozen dirt as every voice on Main Street faded into silence. The cowboy's gloved hand tightened around a folded letter, while the beautiful young woman simply smiled and walked toward him. What did she know that he didn't? Share where you're watching from as the story begins. Late October carried the kind of cold that settled into a man's coat before sunrise and stayed there until dark. Caleb Hardin stood outside the Redstone Creek stage depot with his hat pulled low, a pair of worn leather gloves tucked beneath his belt, and a folded letter in his coat pocket that he had already read at least 20 times. The paper was soft around the edges now. Mail order marriage agency, bride approved, practical, healthy, familiar with household work. Caleb had written one request in careful handwriting. Not beautiful. He had crossed it out once, embarrassed by how it sounded, then written something different. Plain is perfectly fine. Beauty drew attention. Attention invited trouble. He had learned that long before becoming a rancher, back when he rode with Wells Fargo escorts through mountain passes where greed followed anything that looked valuable. After losing his wife to fever and his little boy to a winter sickness 2 years later, he wanted nothing in his life that demanded admiration. Only quiet, only work. A stagecoach horn echoed down Main Street. The driver guided 6 dusty horses to a stop as wheels crunched over frozen mud. Storekeepers stepped outside. Children stopped chasing each other. Mrs. Ruth Calloway folded her apron and watched from the bakery porch. Jake Pewitt leaned against a hitching rail, already smiling like a man expecting entertainment. Passengers climbed down one by one. An elderly preacher, a traveling salesman carrying 2 sample cases, a widow with 3 noisy chickens tied inside wicker baskets. Caleb waited. Then the final passenger appeared. She stepped carefully onto the iron coach step before placing one polished boot onto the street. Her dark traveling dress was simple but neatly pressed, despite days on rough roads. A brown wool cloak rested across her shoulders, and loose curls escaped beneath a modest bonnet. She carried her own leather case without asking the driver for help. She looked toward the crowd. Her eyes settled on Caleb. Then she smiled, warm, gentle, certain. Caleb felt every prepared sentence disappear. "There must be some mistake," he whispered, before realizing he had spoken aloud. The young woman walked toward him without hesitation. "You must be Mr. Caleb Hardin." Her voice carried calm confidence. "I'm Nora Shaw." For several seconds, neither moved. Jake Pewitt laughed loud enough for half the street to hear. "Caleb, looks like they sent you somebody meant for a governor instead of an old ranch." A few men chuckled. Ruth Calloway shook her head slowly. "Poor girl won't last until the first snow." Nora heard every word. She didn't answer them. Instead, she offered Caleb a folded envelope bearing the agency's seal. "I believe they expected you might wonder." Caleb opened it. Every document matched, every signature, every official stamp. No mistake. He folded the papers carefully and looked back at her. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "I wasn't expecting—" She rescued him before he embarrassed himself further. "You weren't expecting me." A faint smile crossed her face again. Not offended, only understanding. "No," Caleb admitted. "I wasn't." She nodded once. "Then perhaps we'd better get acquainted." The whispers continued while Caleb loaded her case into the wagon. As he climbed onto the driver's seat, he noticed several people still staring. Nora simply adjusted her gloves and looked toward the western mountains glowing beneath fresh snow. The horses started forward. Neither spoke for nearly half an hour. Only the creak of leather harnesses, the steady rhythm of hooves, and the cold wind filling the silence between 2 strangers heading toward the same uncertain future. The road climbed beyond Redstone Creek, winding through dry grass and stands of yellow aspen. Snow lay in thin white lines along the northern slopes. Caleb kept both hands on the reins. "My place is 12 miles out," he said at last. "Small house, 2 rooms and a lean-to kitchen. The roof holds unless the wind comes hard from the west." Nora glanced at him. "And when it does?" "I put a bucket under the leak." Her quiet laugh surprised him. He explained the rest plainly. Long winters, no hired cook, cattle that broke fences at the worst possible hour, a town doctor who came only when roads allowed it. "You can still return," he said. Nora looked across the valley. "Mr. Harden, I spent 4 days in that coach beside 3 chickens and a salesman who snored with his eyes open. I believe I can survive a roof bucket." Caleb almost smiled. Near sundown, the wagon turned between 2 weathered gateposts. The ranch sat beneath a dark ridge, its barn silvered by age, smoke rising from a stone chimney. One bay mare shifted uneasily beside the corral. Nora noticed before Caleb climbed down. "She's favoring her left foreleg." She was sound this morning. Nora set aside her case and approached slowly, speaking under her breath until the mare stopped tossing her head. She lifted the hoof, scraped away packed mud with Caleb's hoofpick, and found a small stone wedged near the frog. "Nothing serious," she said, "but another mile would have made her lame." Caleb watched her remove it with steady fingers. Inside the house, dust lay across the mantel, and unopened receipts were stacked beside a chipped coffee cup. Nora took in the cold stove, the narrow bed behind a curtain, and a child's wooden horse resting on the highest shelf. She asked no question. Before unpacking, she tied on a plain apron, heated water, and found flour in a tin Caleb had forgotten he owned. By the time darkness settled against the windows, coffee steamed between them and biscuits browned in the iron oven. The next morning, Nora discovered the water trough leaking behind the barn. Caleb brought a hammer and oakum, expecting to show her what to do. She was already kneeling in the frost, sleeves rolled neatly, pressing the packing into the split seam. "My father repaired clinic cisterns this way," she said. "You worked in his clinic?" "Since I was tall enough to reach the medicine shelf." Over the following days, the ranch changed in small, undeniable ways. The mare healed, the kitchen stayed warm. Caleb's scattered cattle receipts were sorted by date, supplier, and amount. Nora found 2 payments recorded twice and 1 feed delivery never received. One evening, Caleb saw her studying a survey receipt by lamplight. "This charge is for land north of your boundary," she said. "I never ordered a survey." Nora's finger rested on the name printed at the bottom. Gerald Voss. Outside, the wind pressed softly against the walls. Caleb looked at the receipt, then at the woman sitting across from him. For the first time since Nora arrived, the silence between them did not feel uncertain. It felt shared. The next morning, Caleb saddled 2 horses before sunrise. Frost covered the corral rails, and each breath drifted white in the dark. They rode north toward Bill Aldrich's spread, following a wagon road cut between sagebrush and low pine. Nora carried Gerald Voss's survey receipt inside her coat, wrapped in oilcloth. Bill listened from the doorway of his barn, one hand resting on a pitchfork. "Lost 6 steers in September," he said. "Found the fence cut clean. Figured boys were playing foolish." At the Beaumont place, the brothers showed Caleb 3 purchase offers, all signed by different agents but written in the same narrow hand. Old Garrett had found fresh survey stakes near his spring. 2 other ranchers had paid fines for crossing land their fathers had used for 20 years. By noon, a pattern lay across Nora's notebook. Different losses, different excuses. One man behind them, Gerald Voss. Caleb studied her pages while they ate cold biscuits beside a frozen creek. "You saw something like this before." Nora tightened the cork on her ink bottle. "The man I nearly married handled property claims in Missouri. He found mistakes in deeds. then made certain those mistakes benefited men with money. Caleb waited. I left when I learned what he had done, she said. Some folks lost farms their families had cleared by hand. Caleb looked toward the water moving beneath thin ice. I'm sorry. So am I. Mostly that I trusted him as long as I did. He did not reach for her. He only moved his coat across the rock between them, so the wind would not strike her side so sharply. By the time they returned to Redstone Creek, rumors had arrived ahead of them. Chow Pewitt stood inside Calloway's bakery, warming both hands around a coffee cup. Miss Shaw's been telling ranchers she knows territorial law, he said loudly. Funny thing, nobody in Missouri seems to remember a woman lawyer. Nora entered behind Caleb and set a packet of receipts on the counter. I never claimed to be a lawyer. Jake grinned. Then maybe you ought to stop pretending. The room went still. Caleb removed his gloves one finger at a time. She found evidence, he said. More than any man in this town bothered to look for. Jake's smile weakened. Ruth Calloway watched Nora from behind the bread shelves. And why would a woman like you come all this way for Caleb Hardin? Nora looked toward Caleb before answering. Because he told the truth in his letter. Nothing more. Nothing needed. That afternoon, Sheriff Wade Loomis agreed to review the deeds and survey receipts. Gerald Voss, hearing of it, sent word through one of his clerks that Caleb should accept a generous purchase offer before winter made ranching impossible. Caleb burned the message in the stove. 3 nights later, snow began falling over the ridge. From the ranch house window, Nora saw 2 mounted figures standing far beyond the north pasture. They did not approach. They simply watched the barn, the fences, and the warm yellow square of the kitchen window. Caleb stepped beside her. The riders turned away together and disappeared into the storm. By midnight, the wind had buried the wagon road and packed snow against the barn doors. Caleb checked the cattle once before bed, then left his boots near the stove to dry. Before dawn, a distant bawling pulled him awake. He reached the north pasture with Nora close behind. 30 cattle were gone. The fence had been cut in 2 places, the wire curled back with clean tool marks. Hoofprints led toward the timber. Caleb swung into the saddle. Nora caught the bridle before he could turn. Not yet. They'll be across the ridge by noon. That is what they want. Snow clung to her bonnet and lashes. She pointed toward the tracks. 2 riders had circled back toward Redstone Creek while the herd moved west. If you chase the cattle and meet armed men out there, Voss will call it trespass or murder. Either way, he gets your ranch. Caleb's jaw tightened. For a long moment, only the mare's breath moved between them. Then he climbed down. Nora worked quickly. She measured the distance between hoofprints with a length of twine, sketched the cut fence, and wrapped a broken strand of wire in cloth. Caleb found a brass tack pressed into the mud, the kind used on Voss's survey equipment. Sheriff Wade Loomis arrived after sunrise with Desmond Pike and Bill Aldrich. By noon, attorney Harlan Cole stood in Caleb's kitchen, warming his hands around a tin cup, while Nora spread receipts, maps, and witness statements across the table. You kept all this? Harlan asked. I kept what men expected me to overlook, she said. Near dusk, someone knocked 3 times at the back door. Tommy Reeves stood outside, hat in both hands. He had worked for Gerald Voss since spring. I drove those cattle, he said. Didn't know whose they were till we reached the ridge. Caleb moved toward him, but Nora stepped between them. Why come here now? Tommy looked past her at the papers. Because Voss said the next fire would be the barn. The room went quiet. Tommy named the surveyors, the forged claims, and every ranch Voss meant to seize before winter ended. Harlan wrote until his pencil broke. That night, after the men left, Caleb sat beside the stove while snow tapped softly against the window. I nearly wrote into exactly what he planned, he said. But you didn't. Because you stopped me. Nora folded the blanket over her knees. Caleb stared into the fire. For years, I woke expecting to hear my boy coughing in the next room. Lately, I wake and hear you moving in the kitchen. She looked at him. I don't know when that stopped feeling like a memory, he said, and started feeling like a life. Nora's hand rested on the bench between them. I came west looking for somewhere I would not have to make myself smaller to stay. Caleb covered her hand with his. You won't have to here. Outside, the storm carried on. Inside, neither of them let go. 3 weeks later, the territorial courtroom in Redstone Creek smelled of damp wool, lamp oil, and melting snow. Ranchers filled every bench. Ruth Calloway sat beside Desmond Pike, while Bill Aldrich and the Beaumont brothers stood along the back wall with their hats pressed to their chests. Gerald Voss entered in a dark coat, carrying himself like a man who still believed the room belonged to him. Harlan Cole began with the survey receipts. Then came the forged purchase offers. Sheriff Wade Loomis read from the complaint book Nora had forced him to open. Old Garrett described the stakes found beside his spring. Bill spoke of the cut fence. Tommy Reeves, pale but steady, named the men Voss had paid and the ranches he intended to take. Voss denied everything. Then Nora stepped forward with Caleb's ledger. She laid the brass tack from the snow beside a survey invoice bearing Voss's seal. The same maker's mark showed on both. Next came her measurements, compass notes, dates, and a copy of the northern boundary filed years before Voss arrived in Colorado. The judge studied the papers for a long time. No one moved. At last, he declared the surveys fraudulent, ordered restitution to the ranchers, and referred the matter for federal investigation. Voss's confidence vanished without a gunshot. Outside the courthouse, no one cheered at first. Men simply stood in the snow, breathing like they had come through a hard winter and only just noticed the sky clearing. Harlan found Nora near the hitching rail. There's a place for you in Denver, he said. A law office willing to train you properly. You could do work that reaches far beyond this valley. Caleb heard every word. That evening, he packed Nora's leather case and set it beside the door. She found him tightening the strap. What are you doing? Making it easier. For whom? He looked down. You deserve more than 2 rooms, a leaking roof, and a man who spent years forgetting how to live. Nora crossed the room and unfastened the strap. I did not come here because the house was grand. Denver could give you a future. She placed his hand against the worn agency letter lying on the table. This gave me a road. You gave me a place where I could stand without asking permission. Caleb's eyes lifted to hers. I am staying, she said. Not because I have nowhere else to go, because this is where I choose to build. By spring, the recovered cattle were back on Caleb's land, and the neighboring ranchers had formed a cooperative to share legal notices, winter feed, and fence repairs. Nora kept the records in a new ledger with every name written plainly. She and Caleb married in the county office beneath a narrow window bright with mountain snow. Desmond served as witness. Ruth brought a small spice cake. Tommy Reeves stood near the door in a clean borrowed coat. On the ride home, Nora's gloved hand rested beside Caleb's on the wagon seat. He looked at her and smiled. There must be some mistake, he said softly. Nora leaned closer. Still think so? He shook his head. Beyond them, Redstone Creek shone under the winter sun, and the road to the ranch stretched white and quiet through the valley. No, Caleb said. I think they finally got something exactly right. As I picture that wagon disappearing into the mountains, I can't help wondering what I would have done if I had been standing where Caleb once stood. Would I have held on to old fears? Or would I have found the courage to trust someone who arrived carrying hope instead of certainty? Life has a quiet way of sending us the very thing we never thought to ask for. Sometimes it comes wrapped in hard work instead of comfort, in patience instead of excitement, and in a hand that reaches for ours long before our heart is ready. Caleb found more than a wife. Nora found more than a ranch. Together, they became the home each had been searching for without knowing its name. Maybe that's how healing begins. Not with grand promises, but with someone staying through another cold morning, another broken fence, another cup of coffee shared before sunrise. Love grows in those ordinary moments until one day they become the life you never imagined possible. If this story reminded you of someone who quietly changed your life, or if you've ever been given a second chance you didn't expect, I'd truly enjoy hearing about it in the comments. And if stories of the American frontier, quiet courage, enduring love, and unexpected hope speak to your heart, I'd be honored to have you join us again. There are many more journeys waiting just beyond the next mountain, and I'd love to share them with you.